Welcome to the video demo of the Atom Sitecore connector. This integration supports asset management, publishing, usage controls, and also tracking content usage between Atom and Sitecore. There's really three major areas of capability. So the first is pretty obviously the ability to publish assets from Atom into Sitecore. You're making these assets available to web editors so that they can use them on pages. You're giving them a view into the Atom system. But related to this process is also automated formatting and processing. So a web editor may be accessing an asset within Atom that's in a native format. So you have a product shot, that's the master, that's still in its native Photoshop format. And when that gets pulled into Sitecore, it has to be transformed so that it can be used online, transforming it to a JPEG of certain parameters. So just the act of pulling the assets in can also indicate this formatting and processing. The second area of capability is the ability to enforce controls and restrictions. So within Atom, these assets have different restrictions like expiration dates or how many times the asset can be used. And when you're in Atom, all of those all controls are enforced, but they also need to be enforced on the Sitecore side so that users are properly employing those assets in compliance with those restrictions. And finally, after the assets are published, we need to track where those assets were used within Sitecore. So where they're used, how many times they were used, maybe what other content they were used with. So now we're talking about information from Sitecore coming back into Atom so that you have all of the information about how that asset was used. So the important point is to consider that this integration is not just sort of a one-way push from Atom into Sitecore, but it's actually creating a permanent linkage that's exchanging this data between systems, it's allowing the enforcement of these controls, and it's capturing all of the use tracking information. So with that, let's go ahead and dive into the demo. So I'm going to start in Atom, and I have some assets that are ready to be made available to access by the web editor. So we have all sorts of assets in Atom. Not all of them are appropriate for use in the Sitecore environment, so I'm going to go in and tag some assets so that they will become available. So in this case, I have just these three image files. I'm going to tag them as a batch, and it's as easy as just assigning these to a folder, and it's very simple. It's called release to Sitecore. So when I add assets to this classification in Atom, they automatically become available over from the Sitecore side. And you'll also notice while we're here that we have a number of metadata fields, and there's three that are really important for this demo. The first one is this expiration date field, and notice that the date is already past due for these assets. So I'm going to leave it there. Maximum number of uses and a usage counter. So these are some of the fields that are being exchanged with Sitecore that will affect the functionality. So I'm going to go ahead and save this, and now those assets are now available from within Sitecore. So let's go over to Sitecore, and what I'm going to do is go ahead and log into the system and look at all my content and my media library. So now I'm playing the role of a web editor. I need to go in the system and let's say I need to work on some pages and I need to make sure that I have all the assets that I need to use. So typical Sitecore view, I can see all my pages in my site taxonomy, but I can also get to my media library. And I have, all sorts of files that are already in my media library that I've been using. But what I really want to do is go in and be able to browse right into Atom, to have a view into Atom. So these assets are not yet in my Sitecore media library. I want to go see what's been made available to me. So when I go in here, you'll see that I have access just to a single folder, in this case called Release to Sitecore. It's the same folder that we tagged the assets to in Atom. So there could be a whole tree structure here and lots of ways to organize it, but we kept it very simple for this particular demo. So you'll see that these are the assets that are available for me, and indeed the three that I just tagged are right here. Now I can even get information from Atom, various fields that are coming through, so it's just all about how this system is configured, but these ones are available to me. I'm going to go ahead and select this one concert shot, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that asset into Sitecore. So what's actually happening here is I'm actually transferring a file from Atom into Sitecore, and that may be a derivative file. Like I mentioned before, if this asset was a Photoshop file, I would actually be pulling a JPEG into the media library, and then it can be used just like any other files in my media library, with one big exception. Unlike files that just came off your desktop or a network share or something, these are not orphaned. Instead, they're actually linked back to the source Atom asset and all of its metadata. So this is a representation of the asset that's actually in Atom that I'll be using in the rest of the demo. So to continue, let's go ahead and use this particular asset in on a web page. So I'm going to go into my page editor here, and I have just a basic web page to use as an example that I'm going to do some editing on. So you'll see here that I have this web page, I have some text here, I've got an image, I've got some other scrolling imagery here that I'm going to want to edit. So to do that, I'm just going to select this asset, and I'm going to replace the image with an image from my media library. So I'm going to go in here to my media library, and in here under that folder called Atom, there's the one I just pulled in, that concert shot, and I'm going to go ahead and select that one and replace this image with the new one. So that's the simplest example of publishing. That's how you get content from Atom into Sitecore. Now in this case, we're going to keep going so we can show the different controls that are in place. So now I've made this change and I want to save this. Now when I hit save, I actually get an error because that asset was expired. You saw that expiration date. So it's not going to let me do this, which is as it should be. So this is just one example of how these metadata-driven controls can be applied. So I'm going to have to abandon that attempt. So how do we resolve this? Well, let's say that someone has renewed the license on that particular asset. And so what we'll do is we have to change the tagging in Atom to reflect that. Now in this case, I'm coming back into the same Atom system, but I'm using just a little bit different interface. I'm a different user with a different role, and I've got some more streamlined ways to get this work done. Now in Atom, of course, you can always go in and change any of the metadata. So you could edit this asset by just going in and changing the expiration date or any of the other fields. But what I'm going to show you here is you can have even more streamlined ways to do your job, and this is just based on configuration in Atom. So for this user, we have this panel here that shows all of the assets that have expiration dates that, let's say, are organized in a group for assets that would be used on the website. And from this panel, I have these really easy targeted ways to make these changes. Let's say that I do a lot of license renewals. So when I click on it from that panel, I go into this other interface that's very focused. It's just allowing me to change the metadata fields that are relevant for using those assets on Sitecore or on the website. So how many times the asset can be used and when it's expiring. So let me change this to give it a future date. And when I hit Update Asset, all I'm doing is updating the Atom metadata. But because of the linkage between Atom and Sitecore, I'm actually propagating those metadata updates all the way to the item that's in the Sitecore media library. So it's really acting as one asset. It's one asset, and the item in the media library is just a representation of the master file that's in Atom. So if we go back over here to our page editor, and we are going to try this again, now I'm going to select that asset like I did before, and I will use it in my piece here. So there it is, and now I'm happy with it and I want to save it. And that change has been applied. Now of course I haven't actually published this new web page yet. Right? We haven't actually gone to the publishing. So at this point, what I've shown you is the capability to publish content from Atom. I've shown the capability for how controls and restrictions can be enforced within Sitecore. And that last piece is we need to track where this asset is used. So before I actually publish this, what I'd like to do is show you how we're going to do the tracking between Atom and Sitecore. So the first thing is let's go back to our Atom system. and we'll look at some of the tagging that we're doing on these assets. So we go to our Atom taxonomy here, and I have everything under this little Sitecore connector folder. And you can see here that I have a folder here called, or a taxonomy category called Release to Sitecore. Well, this is where we tagged those 3 assets in the very beginning that controls what's available to the web editors over on the Sitecore side. So that's what we did there. But I also have this other taxonomy level here called Where Used. Now there's nothing in there right now. This is where we're going to actually track the usage for when assets are actually used on the Sitecore side. So let's go ahead and do that. We're going to come back in here, actually publish this change. And now I have to go through my publish wizard here. And now I have actually put this onto the public website. It's actually out there. It's actually been used. And so we want the usage tracking to kick in and operate. So that's been done. Now let's look at the Sitecore structure a little bit so we understand what exactly we're capturing. So like any website, there's a taxonomy, there's a structure, pages are located within this kind of overall taxonomy structure. So the page that we were just editing is actually located here. It's under campaigns, it's under content components, it's under campaign headers, it's under innovation, and there's the page. It's called connector. So this is where it lives in the site taxonomy. Now, Atom has a taxonomy. Sitecore has a taxonomy. They're different taxonomies. One's used for organizing pages, one's used for organizing assets, but nonetheless, we can still map the two together. So what the connector has done is it's identified where in this site taxonomy the assets have been used. So if I go back over here to Atom and I browse into my taxonomy here, I can go under Where Used, and lo and behold, I now have all of the folders, if you will, down to the very bottom one. This is where this asset is used, and the asset is now tagged into that tree. So you can imagine now, if you have lots of different assets published on different pages, you're, for all intents and purposes, going to have your site taxonomy here. And when I go to this page called connector, I can see all of the assets that are used on that page. And of course, I could go around and look at all these different pages and see all the different assets that were used. So that tells me what assets I used on what pages. What about if I want to say, okay, tell me all the pages that this asset is used on? Well, that would be done by looking at the actual asset. So every single classification that an asset is assigned to is going to be listed here. So again, we only have one under Where Used right now, but if I use this asset on a bunch of other pages, I would have this identified that these are all the different pages that I've used this asset on. So hopefully that's clear how we're actually doing the tracking. And by the way, this is just one way of doing the tracking. This is the way we've implemented it, kind of based on the site taxonomy. The other thing I should mention here is you'll notice that the usage counter has gone to 1, so that's also information coming back from Sitecore. And we also had the maximum number of uses if the usage counter had gone up to 10 and a user tried to use it an 11th time, we would have had a restriction just like we had for the expiration date. So those are two simple examples of different kinds of restrictions and also how we're doing the tracking. Now, it can be much more sophisticated than this. You can have, instead of just an expiration date and a usage, maximum number of usages, you can have regional controls, restrictions by what portions of the site. You can have many different expiration dates for different factors. And you could even do things like dependencies, like if this asset is published here, then you can't publish it over here, because we have all the information about where these assets have been used. The other really important thing to point out about this tracking information is that all of the data in Atom, all of the user activity, all of this tracking information is captured in the data warehouse and can be reported against. So not only do we know where we've used the assets in Sitecore, but we have all the other information about the assets. For example, what brand, what region, or what campaign are these associated with? What type of asset is this? So in the end, with this data, you can ask questions like, which pages contain assets related to campaign X? Or how many pages contain the product shot for product Z? Or even things like, where are the testimonial videos or the PDF data sheets published? So the power really comes together when you have the tracking and all of the other data. I also want to quickly mention that I didn't show any notifications here, but Atom can trigger notifications on really any event. So when an asset expires or a month before it expires, you could even have notifications go to someone who published an image on a particular page, telling them that there's a new version available and maybe they want to update their placement of that asset. And then, of course, there's all sorts of automation that could be applied as well. And these functions that I'm showing you here, much of this could be automated. And finally, the last point is that all of the capabilities of this integration work in concert with all the other Atom capabilities. So in the very beginning, when I tagged this asset to release to Sitecore to make it available, that could have been fully automated. There could have been a workflow, and when someone hits approve at the end of the workflow, you're approving it to release it for the site. In fact, the web team could even be involved in that workflow and collaboration so that they're annotating and providing comments for the assets that are being set up and prepared for their use. So we hope this demo gives you a sense of what the integration can do for marketing organizations, and more importantly, how it fulfills the Smart Content Hub vision, where Atom is the master source and has conduits to all the downstream touchpoint systems, such as Sitecore. Thank you.